Welcome to FieldLink as we focus on our final segment of our three-part series of in-season tactics to maximize your return on investment. On this episode, we are joined by product specialists Emily Swartz from Indiana and Brad Hammes from Iowa, and we discuss how Fullscale can help maximize your yield this season. Plus, Jody Lawrence will share some big news for producers as we'll point out why growers may want to implement some of the tactics discussed on this episode and the previous two as grain markets take a big turn and growers can cash in on the global weather events. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink for our third and final episode on how to create ROI in season with your crop. We're excited today to have two special guests inside the FieldLink studio as we talk about Fullscale and how Fullscale can impact your crop this season. Joining us from Indiana, as she is a product specialist, Emily Swartz. Emily, welcome.
Hi, Bill.
Excited to have you here, driving down from Indiana to join us here in the FieldLink studio. Also, Brad Hammes from Iowa making the journey. Brad, welcome.
Good to see you today.
Good to have you both here in the FieldLink studio here in Memphis as we talk about how growers can still impact the return on investment this season for their crop. And specifically, we're going to talk a lot about corn and soybeans and wheat today, but there are a lot of other crops that can certainly be impacted. But for the most part, we're going to focus on corn and soybeans today. We'll touch a little bit on some wheat because we still have some opportunities to impact that yield. Earlier in episode 1 and episode 2, we talked about the importance of nitrogen, Coron Metra, utilizing that in season to offset some of those nitrogen needs. And we also talked about the importance of using a good fungicide. And boy, we'll talk a little bit about the weather in a moment, but boy, our crops are really lined up for a big need for fungicides this season, and we'll certainly talk about that. And the third factor is we're going to be talking about nutrition and other ways that we can impact yield and really a grower's bottom line this year. So, guys, let's first talk about how's the environment. Let's talk about the environment agronomically. What's going on in Indiana? Emily, I know you cover a wide range from Ohio, Michigan, down to Kentucky, all the way over to Illinois. Talk to us about the weather. How's the crop coming along in your market?
Yeah, so we've had a split planting season to start with. So we've got crops in kind of two different stages of development from that standpoint. But the weather currently has been mostly wet. So we went through the heat dome with everybody else 3-4 weeks ago, and then we have had plenty of water since then. Continue to get rain every few days across most of the market area. Okay. So not a lot of dry conditions today, but that can change on a dime when August is around the corner.
Yep.
But right now we are wet. We are moderate to warm temperatures. So I think those are the things that definitely lead us down that disease path.
Yeah, definitely. And as we're starting to look at some temperatures forecast this week, certainly the heat's coming and it's here in a lot of places. And I know, Brad Hammes, you cover, that Illinois all the way to eastern Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota, down into Missouri. How's the market looking? How's the crop looking in your world?
I would say it's a little bit uneven compared to what we would typically see, and that's from I'll step back. I've got a little bit of what Emily described on the eastern side, the southeastern part of the area that I cover. But as I go north and west, I get drier. Right. So north and west, they had a great early part of the season as far as field conditions to get the crop in, more timely planting. But then they were pretty dry for a while. But then they started catching rains. And so that they're actually progressing pretty nicely, whereas I go to the eastern part, it's a lot more like what Emily described, where they started out really, really wet, so they had significantly delayed planting, and then they got really hot, and now they're back into a wet phase. And normally farmers are praying for a rain. Right now they're praying for some dry days, wanting to get the roots have a little bit of oxygen down around them so that have a better functioning soil for them. So like she said, with the heat that we have right now, with the moisture that's been prevalent pretty much throughout a lot of the area that I cover, it's perfect environmental conditions for at least half of the disease spectrum that we deal with in corn.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, depending upon where you live, the story's always a little bit different. As we talked a little bit, the further west we go, western Iowa, all the way into Nebraska, Colorado, pretty dry. We get out into the Montana area. They're experiencing a lot of heat right now as well. And further west, it's pretty dry out that way. Further east, though, as you mentioned, Emily, boy, things are pretty good that way. Nationally, right now, I just heard a report, 68% of the corn crop is showing good to above average in terms of, quality and in terms of performance right now. So overall, things look pretty good for the most part. And certainly in the Delta, things are pretty good right now down in the southern area. Certainly this week's got a big week. We're hearing a lot of weather, heat. We're going to be getting a lot of moisture throughout the Gulf region. Texas is getting hammered with moisture. So the story's different depending upon where you're at. But depending upon where you're at, you're going to have different crop needs, that sort of thing. And one thing's for certain, these crops, no matter where you live, we're going to need some nutrition, aren't we? Yeah, it's that time, and we will need to prepare. As we start to think about the markets as well, from a grain market standpoint, we're seeing it's all over the board. We're trying to guess this. We got the Straits of Hormuz, is oil up, is oil down? We're seeing commodities kind of go all over the place. But what's not being talked about is how's the weather impacting the global market? And, listen to a podcast this morning, some experts there. Folks, right now, Brazil is super dry. I know their crop's a half year behind us, but they're setting the stage. It's pretty dry there, so that could give you some key indicators there. Argentina, on the other hand, is super wet. So this could certainly impact some of our supply issues as we look forward, as we take a look at Europe. Europe is experiencing really a century drought right now. France is pretty much done in terms of their crops, as well as Hungary, expecting maybe half of their corn crop, and that's a big deal in that part of the region. So it can continue to spill over into that region. And the other big secret is one of the biggest populations in the world is India. India is facing some extreme droughts there. So when you step back and take a look at the global picture from a supply standpoint, we could have some challenges out there in terms of total global grain supply. So what does that all mean when we tie that back together and we take a look at what's going on right now? Now's a great time to take advantage to maximize our yields. And that's what this three-part series is all about, maximizing yields so that growers are in a position to have enough grain in the bin to maximize their returns. So let's focus a little more on nutrition. And one of the products that we want to talk about today is Fullscale. Fullscale is certainly a biostimulant type of product. And Emily, tell us a little bit about Fullscale and how do you like to position Fullscale to your producers?
So the way I talk about Fullscale is I introduce it as a biostimulant, and that biostimulant's really designed to enhance the remobilization of nutrients. So all season long, if you think of that corn crop, that bean crop, they're bringing in nutrition all season long. And then when you get into that reproductive phase, that grain fill phase, it's about leveraging that nutrition in the plant and moving it into the grain to enhance that grain fill. And Fullscale is a biostimulant that enhances the plant's ability to do that, is really how I like to describe Fullscale from that standpoint.
And Brad, how do you like to position Fullscale as, when do we need to apply it? Let's talk about corn, for example. When do you like your growers to take a look at utilizing Fullscale on corn?
Sure, and it's that transition phase, right? That's where we really want to see, where we get our best responses. And it really comes, Fullscale, there's a lot of those types of biostimulant products in the market that are very specific. Right? They do one thing. If they're a PGR, maybe that hormone has one key role in what that plant's trying to do. Fullscale, being a plant extract-based product, has multiple extracts that were selected on purpose.
Okay.
Right. So we're very intentionally making products to support everything that plant is trying to do at this time of the year. Right. So from helping to stabilize the tissues that lead to reproduction, so through pollination and that initial kernel set, that grain set, through then, like Emily talked about, remobilizing that and helping to hold those bloom positions on all of our plants. Right. So all those things lead up to our best results, typically come on the earlier side of the reproductive stages. Right. Because then we can support that pollination process, can support that process of holding, retaining all those positions. And then also, because we do get that 2 to 3 week time period where we're affecting the plant, we get that support of the grain fill as well, whether that's corn or soybeans or wheat, if we're earlier in the season making that application. So we see good results throughout because, like Emily talked about, with moving all those nutrients into the grain, it's a joke that I've made for years is we always talk about yield potential, but I've still never met a farmer who's able to sell a bushel of yield potential. Right. So it's all about how do we actually realize those bushels. If we're going to build this big cob, build all these nodes and pods on a bean plant, how do we get those nutrients into those to really push that grain up, whether it's through increasing test weight, kernel depth, seed size in soybeans, additional retention in the pods across that plant, all those different things. That's what Fullscale is made to help with that. I'd say a more robust range of the functions that plant's going through during that time of the year.
Right. Awesome. Emily, when we were preparing for this podcast, we talked a little bit about the noise on the street is PGRs.
Oh, absolutely.
Fullscale is a little bit different though, isn't it?
Absolutely. So Fullscale, so when you think about the noise on the street being PGRs, everybody's chasing a PGR. Mm-hmm. They want a PGR. But I always talk to my growers and customers about you really want what the PGR does, not the PGR itself. And what the PGR is doing is stimulating something very specific in that plant. What a biostimulant can do, like Fullscale, because of those plant extracts that Brad just talked about, is those plant extracts are acting like a precursor to that PGR. Mm-hmm. They're giving the plant the tools to engage the PGRs that it produces naturally. So you're stimulating, you're upregulating that plant in a natural way rather than forcing that plant to do something that maybe the plant doesn't want to do.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting approach and an interesting description on how that works, right, Brad?
Yeah, it's fascinating. That was I'll call it an opportunity that I got. It's been several years ago now, but I went and spoke with the Illinois Soybean Association, and they reached out to me for my topic earlier in the summer, and it was, hey, help us understand why is it that we don't see the consistency of yield response to, say, a PGR or a fungicide that has a PGR type of effect in the plant in soybeans like we do in corn. And what Emily described is exactly what I found, right? First, I sat there for a second like, oh, thanks, guys. You asked me the unanswerable question, right? One of those questions that nobody really kind of has dialed in, but I started going through the research on it. And the big challenge is with PGR, especially when it comes to soybeans, is every single process as we go through those R stages, right? Whether you're making blooms, setting pods, filling pods, growing the plant, right? That soybean plant is doing all of those things at the same time during really July and early August. And each one of those has a different mix of hormones, plant PGRs, that support it and help that process to go the best. So how do I put one PGR or even a set rate of 2 or 3 PGRs that I cause more benefit to one of those stages without causing a detriment to another stage?
Okay.
Right, because that's one of the other things that I really came out in what I was reading on the papers and the literature around that is no changes in the plant really are dependent on I have this much of this plant hormone, of this PGR. It's not I have this many micromoles or whatever that amount would be. It's I have this much relative to this much. So now once my auxin goes above how much cytokine I have or how much gibberellic I have, whatever those two that are playing to cause that change, it's that relationship between the two is what drives it. Right. Okay. So how can I put a set rate of 3 of them on there and change a relationship between any 2 of them? Right. So that's why we see that challenge where corn is different, where especially on the fungicide piece, we consistently see that yield response out of that strobilurin class of fungicides on corn. The whole cornfield's doing the same thing at the same time.
Right.
Right. All season long, earlier in the year, you're growing a plant and you're building an ear. But once you hit tassel, the whole field tassels, the whole field goes into the R stages within days of each other. Right. So now you're trying to affect one plant process, and you can be a lot more directive and prescriptive at that with more of a PGR type than you can, especially in beans, where it's like what Emily said, when you can give the plant the ability to choose what it needs. Choose isn't maybe the right word for a plant, but to direct how it's developing.
It knows what it needs.
Yeah.
Naturally, correct?
Let it do what's best for the environment it's in, because one day it might be like it is today, and it's really hot and it's really humid, and that's a certain type of stress. And that day it might be trying to make a bloom, add a new raceme onto a different node, start to fill a pod, whatever that is during the time of the season that you happen to be in.
I always say soybeans are the queen of multitasking.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Because they are doing 4 or 5 different things all at the same time in the time frame that they're building yield. Versus, you're right, corn is very single-minded, very focused on one task at a time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. And as we think through that, and we think about Fullscale, what really separates Fullscale from other biostimulants on the market is that ENC technology, correct? Tell us a little bit more about that, Emily.
So ENC formulation technology is a technology that we've had in our portfolio for well over 20, 25 years. That ENC formulation technology is kind of the key secret to a lot of our foliar products.
Okay.
It is how we drive nutrition into a leaf. It's how we drive those biostimulants into the leaf so that we can actually get more into the plant from our foliar application, and the more of the goodies that you can get into the plant from the foliar application, the more activity you have. It enhances our ability to use products maybe at a lower use rate than some other competing products on the market, and get the same or more benefit with that lower use rate.
It's always important to, maximize the efficiency, and that's what ENC formulation technology truly does. Okay, let's talk a little bit about timing. When should we apply Fullscale? And guys, I think there's a lot of confusion out there of stages. And Emily, and as we were prepping a little bit, we talked about corn specifically. Hey, do it, apply it this time. And, there's a lot of confusion out there. I know even in the marketplace and in the industry, some folks may not be staging crops all consistently. What are some quick tips there that you can share with us, and how growers can consider this when staging corn, for example?
So from my standpoint with corn in particular, we use a term a lot of times adjacent to fungicide of brown silk.
Okay.
Brown silk to me is not a growth stage. Brown silk is the time the silk turns brown, and then from that point forward, it's always brown.
Good point.
So brown silk doesn't define the right growth stage for a fungicide application. So from my standpoint, I've started to talk about tasseling and green silk, because that's the active window that you want to be applying that fungicide. That's the active window when Fullscale does a great job. It's that transition window that Brad talked about when you're transitioning from vegetative growth to reproductive growth. When you've got that tassel shedding pollen and you've got a green silk, that's your window for fungicide and Fullscale, both in corn.
I think that's an important point, because as you point out, at brown silk, things are kind of done. And while things are still green at that green silk stage, you can see that plant taking up more energy and having more requirements. It's going to pull that nutritional right into it, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, what's going on in the ear at that point is green silk, you're still setting kernels. At brown silk, they're all set. So the only thing you can do once you hit brown silk and beyond is lose kernels.
Yeah.
So with a fungicide, with a Fullscale type application, we want to protect and enhance all of the kernels on that ear, and you have maximum kernel set at the close of green silk, essentially. So if we can hit that fungicide during that time, we're protecting our maximum yield potential.
Emily, you talk about fungicides. These two products go together well, Fullscale and a fund. The timing is huge. We can maximize our trips across the field, tank mixes. it works together really good, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We owe almost most of our data, I would say, if not exclusively all of our data, is Fullscale added to a fungicide. So
Okay.
when we look at the yield benefit of Fullscale, it probably had a fungicide under it, and then we're looking at the yield and advantage that Fullscale gave on top of that.
On top of that. So you compound the impact between protecting the plant with the fungicide, then adding nutrition through Fullscale. You kind of get a double whammy. The third key factor, though, is having the right adjuvant, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because that adjuvant is key for enhancing coverage. So the more coverage you have on a plant, the better, the more opportunity you have for uptake, the more coverage you have to protect from a fungicide standpoint. And adjuvants are the absolute key for coverage in any application.
Right. Emily, let's displace some myths out there, some historical myths. We talked about this earlier too. You know, there was a time where some adjuvants might have some impact at critical timing of applications. We've kind of moved beyond that a little bit, haven't we?
Absolutely. About 18 to 20 years ago, and it's amazing to me it's been that long ago, but it was about 2008 that we learned a really hard lesson about adjuvant components, the ingredients of that adjuvant, and how those ingredients can impact yield from a negative standpoint. That was where we were getting that arrested ear development occurring and things like that. We learned the hard lesson 18 to 20 years ago, and since then, we have pulled that ingredient out of our fungicides. It's never been a part of our nutritionals. We are very careful in the adjuvants we recommend in that tassel application so that those adjuvants don't contain those ingredients that cause those issues. So we're in a safe space today because we know so much more than what we knew 18 to 20 years ago. And people don't make those recommendations. We're very careful about the products we recommend during that time frame.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing here at Helena. We've got a wide portfolio of adjuvants to, really be a great tank companion with Fullscale and in some cases a fungicide as well as even Coron for that example. All of those are safe in this area, especially a product like Sidewinder, right?
Absolutely. Sidewinder is generally my number one recommendation in my market area. It's a high surfactant oil concentrate. It is APE free, which is that ingredient that we were just speaking about. You don't want that ingredient in your surfactant. Does an excellent job at both deposition into the canopy, penetration into the leaf cuticle, spreading of that droplet on the leaf surface to enhance. You can basically almost create double the impact of a spray application by adding just 4 ounces of Sidewinder per acre.
So critical. And in some markets, obviously, the right adjuvant is critical depending upon where you live. Pen Plus is another really good one that's certainly recommended, especially in those higher humidity areas in the South. But we have a whole portfolio of those. Just talk to your Helena rep to see which adjuvant best fits your specific market there. But Fullscale at green tassel time is a pretty good option.
Yeah, tassel to green silk is kind of my thought.
Okay, guys, what kind of yield response are you seeing with corn? And then we can lean into soybeans a little bit more.
So that's one of the great things about Helena, with whether it's the R&D that's housed here at Helena Products Group or what we have in the field with our counterpart, our colleague, Dr. Greg Willoughby, and the rest of his teams across the country, is we have a lot of data.
Yeah.
And we have been having a lot of data for a very long time. I think we discussed that we have field data on Fullscale and its research and sale version for 10 years now.
10 years.
10 years. And that's a rarity when it comes to this whole biostimulant, biologicals kind of a space. This isn't something that
It's
made
not
a big
sexy
splash.
fad today, right?
It's not, because it's a tried and true, right? It's a standard for a lot of our operation now is how do we use this product and looking back at all that history that we have. And so we're looking at hundreds of field trials, strip trials, R&D trials over, like we said, 10 years. On corn, we're looking at around a five bushel yield advantage.
Wow.
Right.
5 bushel.
On something like that, even in a market that may be a little bit more challenged as far as commodity prices, which from what you said earlier might have some bullish intentions for the fall as we realize maybe some of the challenges around the rest of the world as far as production. That 5 bushels is going to make a big difference, right? And that's where we do see as we start to split it out, the earlier you can make that application through typical timing in corn, going out to that green silk timing, the better off you're going to be, right? That's where the later you go, the less of that grain feel you have to impact. And that's the challenge with using the brown silk terminology, like Emily said, is once those silks turn brown, they're brown until harvest. Right. So you might be spraying brown silk, but if you think about the sweet corn you might buy at the store, it's all brown silk, but it certainly isn't blister, right? You're looking at getting into decently mature grain on those. Those types of applications, I wouldn't expect as much yield response, but we go with that more typical spot, that would be right. On soybeans, it goes back to that timing thing, right? With all the different things the plant is doing, your normal R2 to R3 time frame would be the right one. Where that can be a little different is if you're doing white mold management. If you're from the part of the country that manages white mold and you're going out with a very early application first, you may want to come on a second pass.
Okay.
As long as you're not getting out into that R4 time frame. And just to clarify, like we talked about on corn, it's real easy to break out soybean growth stages for reproduction. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 and 6 are about filling those pods and then maturing, right? So you got every 2 stages a new thing. Flowers, pods, filling pods, maturing. And then it's just a matter of, is it in the top 4 nodes or is it all the way through the plant? And that's how you kind of go to the early to the late flowering, early to late pod development.
Okay, so
for then on beans, if you would want that R2 to R3, so around when you start seeing little pods and the upper nodes on the canopy, that would be kind of the sweet spot for making that full scale.
That's your trigger point.
That would be the trigger
Application
point.
1, if you're going to do one shot, that's the time to go get it. If you are in that white mold area, maybe you're going to take 2 hits. What would be our second application timing for that?
That's going to be the R3. So once you get to the pods throughout the plant.
Okay. So timing that out, obviously every farm, every field, every acre is a little bit different. Diseases are different. Just know where you're at. Work with your Helena rep to know what some of those conditions are or potentially could be, because we're in the fungicide game. You're trying to outguess Mother Nature a lot of times, correct?
Yeah, you need a crystal ball that tells you what is coming next. Is it going to stay wet or is it going to dry up on me? Or
Yeah. And based on some of the forecasts with this El Nino effect, some of the meteorologists are talking about a wet August, especially in your market, Emily. It could change, Brad, in western Iowa. Who knows? But, staying on top of the game, working with your Helena rep, your agri-intelligence team to really understand what's going on in your field is really, really important to ensure that your application of products like Fullscale, you're maximizing your return on investment.
Absolutely. It's all about return on investment. And really, when you think about increasing bushels, you think about that global situation from a grain standpoint. Having bushels is how you gain return on investment because that's what you sell.
Yep.
So, I've done some work in our Southwest Indiana field trials and Northwest Ohio field trials. We're seeing that 3 to 4 bushel on soybeans. That's about $30 to $35 of return on investment per acre.
Wow.
So that's important to think about.
You start compounding that over, $35 an acre. Hey, you got 1,000 acres of beans. You just paid for your kids' tuition. Mm-hmm. That's how I like to look at it. $35,000. Or in my case, I got a couple weddings I'm planning for. You're paying for some weddings all of a sudden. That's how we need to look at return on investment as a grower. What am I covering? One application. There's some pretty good security based on the 10 years of research and development you and the Helena Products Group and the R&D team's been doing. We got some pretty good data to back this stuff up.
And that's one of my favorite things about, especially as we're just talking about soybeans with Fullscale. Right? Our long-term yield average is an 82% win rate.
Wow.
Right. That's always been the big black eye on the entire biostimulant, biologicals, PGRs is how can you have that consistency of a yield response? And that goes back to what we talked about earlier with the mix of components that we built into Fullscale. Right? Because there's a lot of products that might have one compound, one real component that they're trying to go with. Well, what if this isn't the season that needs that? What if you don't hit it at the right timing for that plant to maximize that function, right? So now you can come at it from multiple ways, and that helps you to get that more consistent yield response. And it's almost unheard of to have an 80% win rate with a biological type product.
Yeah, that's very consistent. And I keep coming back to Emily's comment, the precursor for PGRs. I think that is a really great analogy.
Right, I do too. I have to thank one of our wholesale reps for that one, because he was the one that said that, and I was like, that's a great way to set that up.
Yeah, to set the stage, Mr. Grower, we're setting the stage for this crop with this technology in Fullscale for not just one PGR, but maybe for many in this case. Okay, guys, any last minute tips as it relates to Fullscale as growers are really trying to maximize their return on investment this season?
I'd say what else is going out with it?
Yeah.
Right there. There's two ways of thinking about that this year. Right. I know in talking with Emily, there's some growers, depending on how involved a landlord might be, they might not be willing to use a fungicide, right? Okay. But we can still come out and make a benefit. We can improve yields with Fullscale and nutritional products coming out into that. The other side is adding something to it, right? And I know you've already had one podcast around Coron going out as that carrier, and especially as drones are more and more commonplace across the industry and wanting to have a lower use rate, that's where a product like a Metro Full Bore, where you can have Coron technology that helps with the deposition aspect of things, supplying nitrogen, a great application of boron going into that mix, and supporting what Fullscale is doing with that. So now you have two products that you can put in at a relatively low use rate that would be really functional in a drone application.
Yeah, and we continue to see drone applications expanding from field to field, depending upon where you're at geographically. But I know Emily talking earlier, we're starting to see an uptick in the upper Midwest.
I do. I think drone applications, aerial applications, I mean, those are where we're at. We are augmenting all of that with ground rig as well. So that total getting over all of those acres takes all of those different methods. So identifying, is it a ground rig? What are my opportunities in a ground rig? Because I have a higher volume of water compared to an aerial application or a drone application where my volume of water is very limited. And so you look at a pint of Fullscale, a pint of Metro Full Bore, and you still have plenty of other room in that gallons in that low volume application type of thing. And the other thing that I would add is I think when you go into that soybean in particular, again, that queen of multitasking, you need to support it with your Fullscale, your nutritionals. Don't be afraid to think about a high phos or a zinc combination in there as well, because those are critical in those late season reproductive, that R3, R4 window for soybeans. So we can really enhance that ROI one more step if we look at those additional nutritionals on that soybean pass.
Yeah, it's definitely about maximizing return on investment, not necessarily just focused on spending more. I mean, we could spend all day. We are focused on return, and especially as this market's kind of lining up, that we could have some bullish effects here based on what we talked about earlier in terms of global supply. Of course, follow the FieldLink market report with Jody Lawrence to stay tuned there. But boy, folks, if you're looking to maximize your return on investment this year, podcast, episode 1, focusing on nitrogen, utilizing products like Coron Metra, and episode 2, the fungicides. Let's not stick our head on fungicides. There's a lot of opportunity out there for fungus this year. We talked briefly about it. Stage is set for a pretty big fungal year in a lot of cases. And I know we've talked briefly about tar spot being potentially an issue. We talked a little bit earlier about southern rust starting to make its move. It's been a little bit quiet, but boy, things in the south are teeing up right now. We could potentially see that blowing out, couldn't we, Brad?
Yeah, it's looking like about 2 weeks from now, it's kind of the forecasted window of starting to see some prevalence potentially moving up into the Midwest.
Yeah.
And obviously for anybody that's south of that, kind of going down the river toward the Gulf, it's going to be there first.
Right.
So whether it's that and the warmer conditions would be potentially a challenging gray leaf spot year, but then, for as accurate as the weather predictions might be, it's looking like August into September might be a little bit cooler than average for a lot of the Corn Belt, and that suggests then moving back into that tar spot window. And that's the southern rust can take over a plant fast. Tar spot's not quite as fast, but it's pretty quick. It can really show up and make a big difference in a hurry.
Right. Well, we definitely want our producers, customers to be in touch with their Helena rep to stay in tune what's happening in their local fields, because this stuff can move fast, and we certainly want to put them in the best position to protect their crop this year. And then finally, that third step is just what we talked about. Fullscale is a great option as we try to maximize yield, increase that pod size and fill it up, and take advantage of the technology through ENC formulation and that precursor, Emily, of PGRs to activate and get that plant ready to maximize yield this year. Guys, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink as we focus on return on investment in our third part series of our three-part section, talking about Fullscale. Thanks for joining us on this episode. And welcome back to FieldLink. We're joining us now is Jody Lawrence. Jody, you're on the road today for Innovation Field Day in North Carolina. You're going to be talking to a lot of growers today. Jody, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. It's good to be back. Yeah, it's the Field Day. Summer tours are always a lot of fun, and I understand we've got a special guest with the Innovation Trailer coming today, so that will be it'll be nice to roll that out. I think everybody who was at Commodity Classic saw what a unique piece of equipment that is for what Helena can do in the field and how we can demonstrate things with the rolling labs. So it's going to be a fun day.
Yeah, we're really excited that Macy Carter on site today. Macy's going to be hosting growers there, along with Brad Shaver, Director of Sales for the Helena Products Group, talking about Helena products as well as some of the services that we provide. Jody, you're going to be on site talking about a lot of things, and there's certainly not a lot of things. There's not a shortage of a lot of things to talk about, I should say. Starting with these commodity prices. Wow, starting to blow up on us. We've got a lot of things happening globally, starting with the weather. Tell us a little bit about the weather and how it's impacting the commodity prices today.
Yeah, we have really had a very dramatic change of events, just like it's almost the polar opposite of what happened in June, because in June, prices just kept falling and everybody was having a hard time understanding. A big part of it was when crude fell all the way back to 68, and now the wars have re-escalated on several fronts. But you look at it, corn is now roughly 60 cents off the June 30th low. And beans are at even more than that. You've got China coming in and finally starting to buy some bushels that they had agreed to in the trade deal or at the trade meetings in May. And then you look at just the record-breaking heat and dryness of the European drought, that their corn and wheat crops have been cut back significantly from last year's crop, much less from, just kind of what their normal expectations are. So you've got a really quick change in the last 3 weeks from going down to where nobody was making any money to now where we are back really with some world events that are not necessarily costing the U.S. yield, even though our weather's not perfect. We're in a good position where we're benefiting from it. And, a lot of it, we don't like the fact we've got 2 wars going on and intensifying, but that's just part of what we have to figure into how it affects prices, because we certainly have, we're breaking out by any measure. November beans well over 12.25 in the overnight trade, and December corn over 4.80. And when you throw in all of these events and the possibility that they all get worse before they get better or more bullish to price, this is probably as excited as we've been since 21 or 22 about what kind of upside these markets could have.
Definitely a lot happening. Let's peel the onion back a little deeper here as we talk about weather across the United States. It's a wide range, but overall, yes, we do have this heat wave going through, and there's certainly some impact. But overall, the weather's in the U.S. looking okay.
Well, if you drew a line basically from Des Moines east, they are, it's certainly not last year's record, but you've got some pockets, unfortunately, where we are today in North Carolina. They have had, maybe a quarter of the rain that they normally get in the winter, spring, and summer. So it's been an ongoing 26 drought. You look at everything west of Des Moines, and they certainly have had some really intense heat along the way with not enough precipitation to offset it. And that goes from the Dakotas all the way down into the Texas Panhandle. But when you look at kind of the central, things are certainly improving. May was so wet and prices started falling in June, but what that crop really needed was growing degree days and heat. When you talk about the big ass states of Iowa and Indiana and Illinois just moving east, Minnesota's crops in pretty good shape. Wisconsin, they needed sunshine and heat, and they got it. And we've seen some improvement in crop conditions and potential yield in those states because of it. But it's been a real mixed bag. You look at, more our region where we live, Western Kentucky and Western Tennessee, just an incredible amount of rain since late June to wash out, and flooding problems, and people are going to insurance adjusters. So this is what's going to be really difficult to tell this year, is how all of these pockets and larger regions than just pockets are going to trim back yield. Because you remember last year, for us to get to 186 final corn yield, everybody had record or right at state record yields, and this year that's just not going to be the case, and price is beginning to reflect that.
Certainly, these pockets are throwing a little chaos, these drought pockets, if you will, throwing chaos into the market. Hence, we're seeing these crazy good prices starting to happen as of today here, and really the last couple of days.
Yeah, it's just such a mental boost for all the farmers when they see their prices and their bottom lines getting a little more solid, and then they can come in and start thinking about, hey, okay, this crop has got potential. What am I going to do on my late season applications? Because now those extra bushels after this 70, after this 50-cent rally in corn, they can really make me some money. So it's good that they're now not just in complete defense mode, that every farmer I've talked to whose crop looks pretty good, they're getting more on the offense mode on what can they do to maximize the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think that's really good timing. We still have a great opportunity to enhance those yields, as we talked in our last 3 episodes here of focusing on in-season return on investment. There's some great tips for our listeners there, how to maximize those yields. Plus, we're starting to see, Jody, some southern rust starting to poke up. Certainly some evidence in Mississippi, as well as Texas, and moving further north, Iowa just got diagnosed with its first round of southern rust. So going to be important for growers to be out in their fields monitoring things. And as you point out, the game changed a little bit. We've got some economical reasons why we really need to be on that offensive mode.
Yeah, because if you have an application, and I'm not going to single out any one product or anything because that's not my lane, but you find some of these great products that you can put on, and they cost you 2 bushels to put on as far as price is concerned, but they get you back 6, and then all of a sudden you add that 50 cents on top of your improvement over your cost, and you're starting, then the math is starting to work in a lot of people's favor, which is good to see. But it's been a couple of years.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. The math has changed here in the last few days. Okay, Jordy, the weather story doesn't end here in the United States. Let's talk about the global perspective as it relates to weather. Europe Europe is having a really tough time in terms of their weather.
Yeah, they're in a historic drought all summer with the heat wave, and they've talked about it. Anybody that has been watching any of the international sporting events, from Wimbledon and London to the British Open to any of the events from France, they've had record heat and record drought all year. And you're talking about in a lot of areas somewhere between 25% and a third of the crop is going to be lost, and in other places even more. So the world now has to rebalance stuff, and it even creeps over into the Black Sea area and what happened with the monsoon season in India, because the super El Nino that's building is really starting to cause some problems all around the world. But if you look just in the northern hemisphere, it certainly has impacted Europe, Black Sea, and India more negatively than the U.S. to this point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Europe's getting a lot of press attention there, but India, huge producer and consumer of grain, boy, they're having a tough drought too.
Yeah, if you take all these people who are historically either self-sufficient or net exporters, and all of the sudden they become net importers, where do you go in the world to get the rest of that for Europe to buy, for India to buy, when you talk about wheat and grain-based protein? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, U.S., you got another record crop. Well, we're not sure. South America, yeah, they had a lot, but we've seen world demand, especially out of China, really begin to ramp up, and more coming to the U.S. because of the trade deal, but pretty significant, shift in where all of these bushels may be going into the end of the year.
Jody, you touched on China. Let's talk a little bit there. China starting to raise their hand and take a few more loads of grain from the U.S.
Yeah, we saw it last week because they bought roughly about 25 million bushels, and that is just a little under a metric ton of beans. Metric ton of beans is about 36 million bushels, but that's the pace that they need to be on, somewhere between 25 and 30 million bushels a week in bean purchases from now to the end of the year to meet that goal that they agreed to in the trade deal, which was really an extension of the first trade deal, the phase one, from back when in 2018 and Trump 1.0 administration. And that, that's a significant game changer, especially in the U.S. If, some of this rust becomes a problem and takes off a half bushel nationally. If we have a weather issue, then U.S. bean supply and the ending bean stocks are going to get tight. And this again starts the musical chairs of who's going to be exporting to who's going to be buying from who, and how are we going to move all this across the globe when so much of it is being concentrated, the large portions of it in between the U.S. and South America.
Yeah, let's talk about South America as well. As they're getting ready to do their planting, we're seeing weather starting to impact Brazil as well as Argentina.
Yeah, it's a little early for them to be concerned, but they finished harvest in pretty good shape. Their yields actually for Brazil have been ticking up for corn just slightly. Nothing that's really changing the world balance sheet. But the big thing now that's coming out, and the concern in South America, is that when you start talking about the Straits of Hormuz being shut down indefinitely now, where are they going to get all the fertilizer they need to start planting in 2 months? And, real serious planning in 3 months, because, today's the 22nd of July. So, gosh, school starts back for a lot of the kids in a couple of weeks, and you start thinking about fall and harvest are just right around the corner. And they've got some legitimate concerns that they're not going to get a full nutritional program on their crop if the straits don't reopen to get a lot of that urea and the other nitrogen sources out of the Middle East.
You touched on it. Logistics is peaking topic right now, not just impacting the straits, as you mentioned, fertilizer coming in to Brazil, but certainly oil is on top of folks' minds, as well as other inert inputs with the straits. But there's other waterways that are also starting to be questioned.
Yeah, and this really, a couple of them, just the Black Sea and the Russia-Ukraine war really had not been factored into price at all for the better part of the last 3.5 to 4 years since the original invasion, and then when they reopened the Black Sea Straits through Istanbul. But now both sides have escalated the war. They're firing on grain-carrying ships. They are hitting port infrastructure. They shut down some major areas in the Sea of Azov where a lot of grain comes and goes. And when you start looking at that, just really since that has started, you look at wheat in the same, wheat is up almost, right at $1.25 since that June 30th low. We talked about that on how much July has improved. And this last kick, this last 60 to 70 cents, really comes directly from what could happen if we get back into a shutdown of Black Sea wheat and corn and grain and other exports coming out of that region.
And another waterway that's going to potentially raise some questions is the Panama Canal. Today, announcement came out that they're starting to restrict some of the logistics, not today, but in the near future, because of some concerns with the El Nino effect impacting the water availability for that canal.
Yeah, this super El Nino development. And remember, a couple of years ago, that happened in Panama and then that Central America region. They had a severe drought. And you think, since it's a strait between the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean, that they have an unlimited amount of water that they can just flood the canal with. But that huge lake that's right there in the middle of Panama and right in the middle of the canal is such a big part of how and it's a freshwater lake, so they try not to bring in any of the brackish seawater and kill all the fish. And it's really causing them a problem, because it's just like when the Mississippi River has been so low, a couple of years ago, and we're heading back that way a little bit in some areas, that you have to start limiting the draft depth and other things that go through the canal. And what that means is it just takes longer and it costs more to get something through the canal and going east to west or west to east.
Certainly a topic to keep an eye on, as that strait could impact some global prices for commodities as well as other inputs for producers. Jody, want to thank you for joining us on this episode of FieldLink as growers take advantage of some of these high prices. And we encourage them to follow the FieldLink Market Report. If you're not getting Jody's emails as well as his text messages, log on to helenaagri.com and be sure to register for those pieces of information.
Yeah, and Bill, to highlight that, we sent out a sales alert text through the FieldLink text today. So anybody that wants to stay on top of everything that we're seeing in the markets, please go in and sign up. It's just a couple questions. It's not much information. You're not committing to anything. But in this time of volatility, the last thing you want to do is be a day late on something that really could have benefited your operation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jody, and our growers do too. Great insight, great information, great timely information from the FieldLink Market Report. Jody, again, thank you and have a great day in North Carolina.
All right, thank you, Bill.
Be sure to join us on September 1st through the 3rd at the Farm Progress Show in Boone, Iowa, as the Mobile Innovation Laboratory from the Helena Products Group makes its way to the Corn Belt. We'll highlight some new herbicides and technologies from the Helena Products Group. Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Be sure to ask your Helena representative how Fullscale can impact your yields this season.